Hello everyone, and welcome to Modcast episode 16. Joining me as always is Kris.
Hey.
Hey. And joining us today is the current lead of Fallout 4 New Vegas, Metamoth741. Welcome aboard our podcast.
G'day. Glad to be here.
And the first question I would like to ask you, Metamoth, is what excuse have you come up with when Fallout 4 New Vegas doesn't come out?
Well, I, for one, would initially like to probably blame... Man, I don't have an excuse for this one.
Oh, God. You heard me here first, folks.
It's our fault. We talked you out of it.
Oh, no.
We gave you too much cynicism, and after you just decided to walk away, it's all Unoctium's fault.
No, we're paid off by Bethesda to cancel development.
Yeah, isn't that true? Probably they just they will pay you off because they're trying to destroy New Vegas. I think because it makes them look bad or something.
Oh boy!
But no, let's start with an actual question. The first thing I want to talk about is you just released the intro to Fallout New Vegas, but it's not the intro to Fallout New Vegas. It's a bit different. It's something you've completely recreated from beat to beat to beat in the Fallout 4 engine. So, can you tell us a little bit how that came out? Obviously, perhaps starting with the scripting. You've done a huge amount of scripting on it. So, I was just wanting to know a little bit behind the scenes of what went into that sort of thing.
Well, we started work on that quite a while back. When F4NV first started, one of our first things was, okay, we need to hammer down our development guidelines and goals so that we were not wandering all over the place blindly. So one of the first things we said was, okay, the area around Goodsprings and everything has to be branched out from there. That gives us a nice vertical slice to work forwards from. As a result, the game starts in Goodsprings and starts in Doc Mitchell's house. So some of our first steps were just to get a bare bones version of that up and functional, so that way it was there and working. We started working on that, and then we put it aside because it was in a mature enough state where we were basically just waiting on assets and other things like that. So it sat there, and then it was picked up and worked on as things came along. Finally, the scripting was in a state where it could have been shown, and then the whole debacle with voice acting came along.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, we suddenly have this situation where we've decided, well, we need to revoice everything, and Doc Mitchell is one of those characters that you need a really strong voice actor for. So, instead of taking the time to, showcase it without voice acting, or giving people the wrong impression by showing a version with the original voice acting, we decided to hold off and wait till we got, our one guy to just do the job. In that time, we started doing work on new things, and like anybody who creates content, we had people coming along saying, hey, I'm reworking this, or I found a way to do X or Y. Maybe we should use that in the intro. And so, over the course of this last year or so, new little bits and pieces would come in, and we'd start sort of enhancing or upgrading the way we did things. So, for instance, we'd get new assets in and decide, well, you know what? We can make the Vigor Tester look better, we can change the way it animates to create something that feels closer to what New Vegas did, while also being more tactile. So the scripting was then sort of pushed back, and we'd rework things. Once that was done, a lot of the other stuff, you're looking at stuff like the skill system. That had been in a mature state as of late last year. We started working on that very early on because that was something that, it's core to Fallout New Vegas. So it was one of the first things we started on. Along with that was the trait system. Yeah. And those were just put in and it was ready to go pretty much.
So, like, in terms, some of the things look particularly new since I last sort of was hanging around your parts. Like stuff like the reflectron, is that right? That's what it's called, the thing to change your face. Is your face in the reflectron, or is it just sort of over a face, like with a kind of like a hole in it, so you can see the NPC?
I regret to inform you that we may have cheated a little bit, and we're using an overlay.
Oh wow! Okay, you heard it here first, folks.
Immersed and broken.
Pretty much.
Canceled everything.
Although the animations were cool, like that was by the guy who did those trailers, right? I can't remember the guy's name. You probably know his name.
Pandemic.
The guy who makes your... Yeah. So that's like where he basically lifts you up, and that was pretty cool. And was there anything else particularly unique in that opening sequence, or was it just sort of your by-the-by Fallout 4 scene?
Well, I mean, there's the tiny thing that everybody noticed, like, two bears high-fiving. That's a minor thing. One of the big things people like to see, for the most part, some people don't care for it, is the animation work done on the various perk and trait icons. And that's something that Fallout 4 had, and we were quite fond of it. It's a tactile thing, it's an audio thing, it just feels and looks good. And with the new sort of more integrated heads-up display that Fallout 4 has, we felt it was a good thing to have in there, so we did bring all the old perk trait icons forward like that.
Yeah, it definitely has, like, those icons definitely add, like, some brevity to the whole, what they're representing, obviously. So, like, when you have all these faction icons, presumably when you have the Legion icons, you have, 2 Legion cartoon characters doing something, cartoonishly representative of what they actually are. So with almost like Fallout New Vegas is like more symbolic in a sense, because Fallout 4 is definitely almost as cartoonish as it's. Again, you might completely disagree, but sometimes that's what I personally feel. So, like, do you have to interpret, like, obviously when you're making those things, those static images animated, you have to do a lot of creativity, don't you?
Oh, definitely. Our animation lead, that's Big C Man or Charlie. He's very good at that. He will sit there and he will just come up with ways to make things. He doesn't go quite as comedic as Fallout 4 does, because in some places New Vegas can be more serious, in others it really goes off the rails. But we're trying to not play with the tone too much. But he really does go out of his way to make things feel very believable, and also capture that same sort of almost wacky feel that Fallout 4 did.
I mean, New Vegas actually has an option to switch off the comedic tone, so or switch it on if you want to look at it that way. So, I mean, you feel like you have to. Are you doing like whole animations for what's it called again? Wacky Wasteland, or are you just keeping it generally quite reserved to go?
For Wild Wasteland, we're not trying to add too much to the game for that. It's really easy to sit there and say, "Oh, this would be funny," or "Oh, hey, we should just make jokes about every major bug that New Vegas had in it." Can't Doc Mitchell's head do a few loop-de-loops while you're creating your character? But we'd rather sort of stay grounded, so that way the stuff we do add for Wild Wasteland feels meaningful and doesn't just feel like we just threw everything in.
Cool. And is, like, going forward, are you planning to make any? Again, this might be something to reveal in the future, but going forward, you mentioned you're sort of reimagining Fallout New Vegas, so. Are you going to make any changes to Fallout New Vegas' like base mechanics, like the faction system, or the structure, or the Wasteland, for example? Will there be as many invisible walls as there was in the Mojave, or will there be a little bit more freedom when it comes to the faction system, like, for example, resembling Fallout 4, for example? Or are you generally going to be quite faithful to the mechanics, and it's just a graphical upgrade to Fallout 4? Like Fallout New Vegas, sorry.
We're trying to avoid the whole graphical upgrade thing. There's a lot of good mods out there that already upgrade Fallout New Vegas' look. It's available now, you can play them. We don't really see a purpose in us competing with that. So we're going to be reworking and enhancing things where we can. It's things like, you mentioned invisible walls, we're trying to cut that. We have the advantage of hindsight. We know those weren't a great idea, they don't play well, they feel weird. There's no point in having them. Other things like the faction system and certain nonsensical abilities of enemies just psychically knowing that you did one thing or another, and then basically saying, well, he's a terrorist now, because my psychic powers told me so. We're getting rid of silly stuff like that. Another thing we're playing with is the survival system from Fallout 4 and bringing it back towards the hardcore system of New Vegas. Because, in our eyes anyway, the survival system in Fallout 4 was a more mature implementation of the things first tried in New Vegas. And there's a lot of great stuff it did. So if we can take those little things and just push them back into the New Vegas systems and make an amalgam, we can create something that we think will play pretty well.
I mean, New Vegas system was almost like it was just stop the counter from going so low, in a sense. Like, it never really felt like a full-on hardcore system. It never rewarded you for, staying on top of your own situation, as it were. So you're kind of bringing that from Fallout 4, which is a lot more dynamic system, one might say, I guess.
No, you're totally right.
Yeah. And, like, obviously the previous game, New Vegas, was structured, like you mentioned, there's not going to be invisible walls, but part of the original game was, like, here's a very big invisible wall, complete with death claws guarding it, to stop you from getting too far in the story. So will that be there? Will you have, like, death claws that can track you down from halfway across the map? Or will the player literally be able to walk to Benny, for example, straight from Goodsprings?
Well, stuff like that is central to the core gameplay loop of the original game, and that is something we're trying to preserve. We're kind of aiming for a New Vegas as you remember it, not as it was, kind of feel. So when we do that, it's stuff like that. Death Claws are definitely going to be up in Quarry Junction. And if you wander up there, you're going to have a bad time, though you can sneak through if you're real good or real gamey about it.
I've never been able to do it. Maybe I'm just bad at games, which people will test to.
Yeah, there's like Cazadors up just north from Goodsprings I could never get past myself. It's just over at that point.
Oh man, don't even ask me. It's a bad time.
Well, I think the natural inclination is to go north. I don't know. Like, first time I played it, I just thought that was the way you're supposed to go, and then boom. It's like, you hear the buzzing, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I wandered up to Bonnie Springs and had a real bad time. Just got torn to pieces by Cazadors, and I was like, okay, this game doesn't like me being here.
You got as far as Bonnie Springs. Okay, well, that just shows us I was just... I think maybe once I managed to get past, but then I think the Deathclaw ended up chasing me halfway to Vegas, and that was it for me. So generally, I just thought it was coded like you just can't get past at all.
Yeah.
Maybe unless you sort of hike through Black Mountain or something. I don't know, but
Yeah, there's a couple of routes. There's even one circling back from around. If you head up past Prim, there's a little pass, and you can use that to sort of game your way up to get Black Mountain and sneak through.
So obviously there's obviously like Cazadors, for example. Have you solved the problem of new skeletons in the game for beasts, as it were? Like, so you can create new creatures, or old creatures?
No, we're still working on a solution for that. We're lucky there's a lot of skeletons we can reuse, at least as a stopgap. And if and when the time comes that we do have access to a toolkit, we will probably rework whatever we need to or see fit as needing to be remade.
I think Cascadia has that, don't they? They've worked it out. Maybe they're just sort of keeping it to themselves.
Yeah, they
bastards.
I understand they have an internal toolkit, but they've been keeping it to themselves.
Well, karma's a bitch. Okay, so I mean, you could just. I mean, you probably can't use the blood bugs skeleton because they sort of hover in a kind of sad way. I mean, the Cazador animations were just as scary as the Cazadors themselves. Like, they would crawl along and then they would fly like flurry towards you. So it's quite difficult to recreate, I guess, in a sense.
Definitely.
Yeah. So like, have you created more animations than Dr. Mitchell picking you up? Like, because obviously New Vegas had quite a lot of unique animations, like more than Fallout 4, but Fallout 4 puts all its animations in furniture now, which is odd. I just like, are you going to recreate those things, or are you just going to try and use a vanilla when you can?
We have a few new animations in the bank. We're trying to remake what we feel like. If there's a situation where a new animation really does make sense, we're not going to be doing like janky things where it's like, well, this Fallout 4 animation is close enough. But when you're in a situation where, like, when you first go into the Silver Rush and you see Gloria Van Graff do a little monologue, then execute the guy, Fallout 40 has an animation for a guy being tied up on the floor. So we might as well take advantage of having that and just use it instead of wasting time making another animation that really achieves the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And like in terms of like Benny's, like, because obviously Fallout New Vegas had the animations for the intro kind of built in before they were just like, this looks like shit. Let's render something. But like, are you going to do that? You're going to have Benny sort of make his movements, or are you going to render that or something, or
we have to.
Yeah.
We cannot reuse any of the assets from Fallout New Vegas. That includes the video from the opening of Fallout New Vegas. As a result, that means everything in there has to be redone.
How do you feel about the fact that you're not, like, even with the Tale of Two Wasteland solution, you're not allowed to use anything? I mean, obviously, you're just, like, practically you just have to accept it, but, like, how do you feel? Do you wish you could use something, or do you feel like maybe you feel relieved that you can sort of go entirely new canvas, as it were? Or do you wish you could still use the old stuff?
It's a mixed situation. I mean, certainly there's an upside to being able to say, well, guess what, guys? We've got all the voice acting ready to go. Let's just do this. And there's also, there's none of the pressure to sit there and say, well, we now need to find somebody who sounds just as good as, the guy who voiced House or the guy who voiced Raoul. These are very, very distinctive voices, and we're basically facing the challenge of, well, I guess we need to find somebody who's that good.
Yeah, like Raul, isn't he Danny Trejo? Isn't that Danny Trejo who voices that? Yeah,
it straight up is.
That's a tough one. Yeah, and Felicia Day does Veronica, right? Yeah, so.
Oh yeah. I mean, it must be tough. Like with a few Capital Wasteland, when we're sort of stirring, we're not coming out. By the way, we're just when we consider shooting a re-release, we're like, should we get a voice actor that sounds exactly like the old one, or should we just go with someone entirely new who just will reinterpret the role as it were? I mean, have you come up with that kind of choice? Where it's like, do I either have someone who sounds like Danny Trejo, or should I just recast someone completely sounding different, you know?
We've kind of opted to do both. There are some roles in Fallout New Vegas that are very well acted, and it's kind of hard to look at that character and say, I can picture him sounding different. There's other voice acting in Fallout New Vegas that just isn't very good. That's down to just time constraints or, you know, actors in a role they just don't fit. And in that case, we're pretty happy to say, well, we have this guy who probably sounds better than the original. Let's use him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the biggest one is, like obviously, I don't know if you heard the story where there was, like, they tried to cast 80,000 lines in 2 months, and so you ended up having a lot of voice actors that didn't really sound much like what they looked like. So obviously you have the benefit of hindsight right in that, you know, you can have differently sounding people. So, but those are just like second-rate and third-rate characters. There's definitely people like Rene Auberjonois who did Mr. House, and I mean, maybe Matthew Perry for Benny. People say he sounds a bit shit in the role, but like, I don't know, maybe he conveyed the role quite well. So, like, I imagine those be like, oh, we should just recast someone else because those people sound, you know, so unique that doing a copy would just not measure up, if you know what I mean.
Certainly, and you know, when it comes to casting, we have to sit down and we generally discuss it on a role-by-role basis. We have a team that just focuses on the voice acting and discussing, you know, should we use this character's, you know, original voice as sort of the template for what we want to aim for, or do we want to push for something brand new and just get away from something we didn't like? And we've been really lucky so far because a lot of people really do want to work on a project like this as a voice actor. And we've seen just so many applicants that it's given us a pretty broad base to draw really good voice actors from.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about the reception you received? Because obviously a lot of that base comes from people who are really, you know, really enjoyed your video, and there's been quite a lot of people. So how do you feel about, like, you know, is it a couple million or so who've seen the trailer or the demo? Like, how do you feel about that amount of popularity?
Well, I mean, it's humbling at the end of the day. I mean, I'm just one guy on a team at the end of the day, and to see that something I helped to work towards has gotten this kind of attention, gotten this many people going, oh man, this is awesome, I want to throw my hat into the ring with these guys, or, you know, I want to put my time, some of these people, professionals, saying, I want to use my expensive equipment and essentially spend money on helping these people to make something great. It's just humbling and it's unreal.
Yeah, yeah. And with regard to that, obviously that feels probably humbling, and these are sort of great feelings at the moment, but have you ever sort of, you know, these big projects come with their own kind of humility, in the sense that they could, you know, like very few make it to the end, and obviously, you know, people feel completely different from at the start than they do at the end, for example. So, I mean, have you sort of looked forward towards like the crunch period or progressing or seeing people that were invaluable leaving or things like that? I mean, do you definitely feel like you've anticipated that kind of thing, or is it just something that you feel like you can deal with once it comes?
Well, as is probably well known at this point, this isn't the first F4NV project. There was another one that came before it, and it fell apart. And then we kind of picked up the pieces and put together, essentially from whole cloth, a new project and a new team. And when we did that, one of the assumptions we made going in is that any project can fail, and we need to find ways to, A, ensure that our project doesn't, but B, understand that it can, and come up with ways for all of the effort that everybody put into this massive project to not go to waste. So as a result, most of our development is sort of guided by those two key principles that, one, we have to try not to fail, which I know it's not really an obvious idea, but, and two, failure is always an option, and we need to find a way to mitigate the damage it does to people's work if it does.
I mean, you've already got like a somewhat of a CV for a lot of people, in the sense like, oh, here, I recreated Fallout New Vegas's intro. Here it is, you know, give me a job. So like, there's you're already sort of sitting on something that you've already accomplished, in a sense. I mean, that's up there with all those people that's recreated Metal Gear Solid's intro and things like that. And so, I mean, I personally feel there's always something you can fall back onto. I'm never a big believer that, you know, I'm a big believer in, you know, missing the moon but reaching the stars. So
certainly
there's still that.
Well, I mean, it's a personal thing, but one of my big personal things is anything that a team member makes, like you make a weapon or you make a package of, or like make anything at all. I like, if possible, and if they feel like it, to see it released, because when they do that, not only does it, show, hey, this is something that F4NV is using, isn't it neat? But more importantly, it means that person's work isn't just a screenshot. It's something tangible that they put out there and other people can actually use. And I think that's really important, not just for the whole, this is something I made, put it on my CV. I think it's important for somebody to be able to work on a project like F4NV and to actually get their work out to somebody outside of, the 30 decades it's going to take to make.
Right. And what kind of, I've seen a few things. You've already released quite a few mods for Fallout 4 New Vegas, haven't you?
A decent number.
Yeah. Double shotgun, or what was that what's called? That's right.
List.
I think they're all double.
I think we've got almost a couple dozen now.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Everything from a few weapons. We have different frameworks developed for Fallout 4, stuff like Damage Threshold. That's out there and usable right now. We also have the slow-mo kill from Fallout New Vegas is an available mod, stuff like that.
So does that literally zoom up to the enemy once they're dying, like the old style? Like, obviously that's not really in Fallout 4 unless you're using VATS, but is that like when you're shooting at them from far away and it's like, and the camera switches kind of intrusively, is that the mod?
We're avoiding the super spooky, hey, let's zoom 30 miles away to something your companion killed thing. Yeah. And we're trying to keep it down to a slightly more sane slow-mo from your perspective. Our first trailer we put out last year with it was the highway patrol station killing a couple of raiders in there. That actually featured it with the slow-mo. That wasn't just a fancy trick of the editing.
Oh, okay. So, in terms of the actual story, because I'm quite fond of this, are you replicating everything in the story and just start changing up the aesthetics and the sort of mechanics just sort of around the story, or are you changing some elements that you don't like, or are you enhancing some parts you did? Or something?
We're trying to avoid falling into the realm of fan fiction. We're going to focus on the original story. We might touch some of the cut content, but that's very much a case-by-case, be very gentle with it, don't break it kind of thing. We're not going to go and re-implement this big sprawling chunk of content that was, had 3 things written about it in the creation kit and was mentioned by a developer 18 years ago kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Like the Teddy quest, for example, and still in the Fallout New Vegas GEC.
Yeah, stuff like that we look at a lot more closely than, for instance, we're going to allow you to keep playing F4NV after the second Battle of Hoover Dam, but we're not doing any post-credits content.
Alright.
There's so much of it in New Vegas, and I don't know how familiar you are with all of it, but it's all at odds with itself. It's pretty clear It was very iterative, and they weren't really finished on it when they finished the game. And we don't really want to have to sort of start saying, well, I guess this is canon now, because that's just, like I said, that enters the realm of fan fiction, and we don't really want to get into that.
So obviously I'm aware of, well, obviously not obviously, but I'm aware of the Colonel Moore basically saying, hey, thanks for the Hoover Dam. Is there actually stuff that contradicts that, in terms of the end thing, or because obviously
it's less that, and it's more like I'm trying to think of a good example. It's little things like there's cut dialogue for the Securitrons, and it's them actually hailing Kaiser.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All right. That's pretty contradictory.
Yeah, it's silly little stuff like that doesn't fit. There's also things like with the Legion ending. If you did that, I believe it's set up so that way it looks like the Legion has just taken everything. Whereas if you talk to the NCR people there, they seem to think the Battle of Hoover Dam ended 30 seconds ago, kind of thing, where they're getting contradictory reports from the front. Yeah. So it's kind of a thing where we'd have to start making decisions on what does or doesn't make sense. And at this stage, anyway, we don't really feel comfortable making those kind of decisions for a game that we didn't write.
So you're going from, post-game content, it either would be the most ambiguous collection of dialogue that you guys would write, or it would just be the Hoover Dam thing didn't happen, or like a lot of other games use, that they basically think, obviously a lot of games end with the world ending, but they let you continue afterwards, so it's everything's still in flux, but your log is all completed and things like that. So is it more like that, or are you going for a bit of fan fiction in terms of doing some ambiguous little referrals to the Hoover Dam thing, or?
No, the goal is just to sort of leave the world sort of in a in-state situation where nothing has happened yet.
Right, so it is like other games where it's just the the big apocalyptic end battle hasn't happened, except the fact that you just fought it 5 minutes ago. So it's kind of like that. Yeah. So like, did you become like what? How did you become Fallout 4 New Vegas's 52nd leader? What elevated you to the throne of this mod, if I can ask?
Well, you go back to the old project. I was looking to get involved with the project literally the day it collapsed. And so I got in there, and I was like, oh, well, I was going to apply, but clearly this is not the place. And then somebody pointed me at Nakio-san, who recently has taken a leave of absence from leading the project. And he was looking to sort of scrape together what he could from the old project and sort of preserve and then maybe get things going again. And so I contacted them and said, I've done some work with the creation kit, I've done some work with Skyrim's creation kit, and I've been modding for a few years. Would you like a hand? I have a background in management and other such things. And he was like, yeah, sure, you can come on. And at that point, it was kind of an advisory role. I was just there to sort of help the project get itself back on its feet and get functional. But over time, that just sort of became a more permanent position with the team. And so I ended up getting codified as one of a joint project leads. And then with Unoctium, you might recall that we had 3 leads at one point. After the departure of the 3rd lead, we were down to 2, and then Nakio stepped down. So that just leaves me in the position for the time being.
So yeah, are you a scripter yourself, or did you implement, or are you more of an ideas guy? I mean, I know that's I know that's a bad word. I know it's a bad word. But like, I mean, sometimes it just works out that way. Sometimes you can be a very good ideas guy. And
well, I do level design. I do some limited scripting. I'm no expert by any means. Personnel management is one of my big roles, which means, sort of working out where the project needs to go based on what we have sort of as a team, and discussing with different project leads, what resources they have, what resources they need, where we need to allocate people, and figure out what needs to happen so that way we can start meeting other internal milestones. Alongside that, I have a background in music, so I work with our voice team a little bit to sort of work with managing them and bringing people in and looking at auditions and the like.
So, like, you're actually almost like the musical, I wouldn't say music director, but you're kind of like, what sound you want. Would that be the right way to put it?
I'm not really the guy to go to for sound. We do have a sound lead. I just work with him. Our sound lead, Tostikas, is very good at what he does. And he is a professional in the field. I'm just a guy who, plays a lot of musical instruments. So, while I know the hardware and I know how to do things, he is just far and away more skilled than I am.
And obviously you had the first track, like the Goodsprings, the Doc Mitchell's internal. Obviously it sounds a teeny bit different from the Enon Zur track, but are you generally going for recreating all these tracks in a similar sense, or just sort of being inspired by them, just picking up the motifs, or...?
We're generally aiming for closer to the original than sort of wandering off and just doing our own thing. New Vegas' soundtrack is very emotive, and it does a lot of really cool stuff, especially on the technical side, so we don't really want to get too far from that.
Yeah. I mean, I always thought the sound design in New Vegas, like, it's just something, like, really unique about it. It's almost like the sound design kind of merges into the music, and the music merges back and forth. I know it sounds a teeny bit pretentious, but, like the sort of ruffling of the weeds versus like the music, and you're not entirely sure which is which, if you know what I mean. And it just generally had quite a unique feel to it. So I wonder if you guys were kind of replicating that kind of thing, or whether you know what I'm talking about.
No, I certainly get what you mean. It's grounded in the environment. That's the phrase I was looking for. No, it feels like it's part of the world you're in, and that's something that we think is really important. Like, we will sit down and sort of discuss the feel and the tone, not just compared to, the original, but where it's being used.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of almost urban legends or desert legends, where, like, for a long time, I was telling people I was sure I heard whispering whenever you visited the graves in Goodsprings. Like, and people just thought I was crazy, and I just thought I was hearing things, but, like, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly
like,
what you're talking about.
There was just like whispering, and just like the game had a kind of like a life to it, like a kind of mystery that was kind of like you play the game, you completed it, hey, let's play the next game. But like this New Vegas seemed to live on with like all the stuff that was left over. It almost makes it sound like it was like when you hear about the behind the scenes stuff, where basically writers weren't talking to one another for the whole development, even more unbelievable. So,
yeah.
I mean, are you having the same problems? Are you trying to replicate the behind the scenes drama like the New Vegas had? Or are you just going to go, I hate this person?
You know it.
Yeah, just like, oh, these people hate each other, so I hate this person too. So, I mean, yeah. I mean, did you hear about that kind of thing? I realized
I've done a lot of reading about the development of New Vegas, just sort of like getting back to the idea guy thing you did mention. I do come from a design background. It's part of what I do professionally. So it's something that I do discuss with the team when we're planning ahead for things we might want to tweak. And looking back at what the New Vegas team wanted to do with systems is something really core to the way we like to look at stuff. So I've read a lot of the horror stories from Obsidian.
I just mostly read the Avaloning, if you want to call it that, where he destroyed his career in the US maybe in one night, which was the best night of my life. No, I wouldn't say best night, but the best night online of my life. Where it's just like he was just saying, "Oh, this person did this person's an asshole." And I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Again, I don't want to drag drama into the podcast, but it's me. So, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, like, did it surprise you when you first learned of that? I mean, because obviously it might be Fallout New Vegas is probably one of your favorite games, and therefore you wouldn't be blamed to thinking that there's a cohesive design behind it all.
Okay, so just looking at the stuff going on at Obsidian, you sort of get an understanding that, there was a lot of just internal politics, and it was sort of a long-running thing. And a lot of developers do have issues with stuff like that. I know, for instance, Ubisoft has a very, very famous set of issues, for instance, with their QA teams, with just constantly documented abuse and people just hating each other, and projects like barely functioning at the QA level, not because the QA testers are bad, people are bad at their jobs, but just because the workplace just isn't a very good place to be. So, reading and hearing about this at Obsidian, you have a lot of very skilled, very talented people working together, and, you're going to have disagreements, and if the workplace isn't conducive to working forwards from those, you're going to have issues. And considering the sort of... I'm not going to fall back into the whole, they only had 18 months to make New Vegas thing, because that's kind of a worn-out thing, but knowing the time pressure they did put themselves under, it's very understandable that they would seriously start to see some cracks for them.
I mean, I'm surprised that they managed to get out the game they did, if you want to... I mean... Like it's the same thing with the Star Wars game, KOTOR 2. I mean, that game didn't fully come out. So, I mean, I'm surprised New Vegas sort of had its complete release as it did. I mean, 4 DLCs to basically describe the rest of its, essence. So, I mean, most games don't even get that. So, yeah. But I don't know. It's just one of those miracles. But I mean, what kind of games do you play now? I mean, do you play games, or do you find your game time occupied by modding time, or do you still play RPGs or other things like that? Or
well, when I play games, I typically find myself I will just focus through and play through an entire game. If it's something that needs multiple playthroughs, I'll hammer through multiple playthroughs and just do them. For instance, Kingdom Come, I played through that a few months back. I actually bought it on release. The game crashed 4 or 5 times within the opening sequence, which at the time forced you to play through the opening cutscene. So I think I had some...
I mean, that probably reminded you of New Vegas in a sense. It's nostalgic.
I was remarkably lucky with New Vegas. I got it on launch on the Xbox 360 and had absolutely no crashes running through it.
Well, I got it at Xbox 360, and at that time I assumed consoles were immune to crashing, and I was like, that was the first game that ever crashed in my console, and it crashed like 20 times, and I was like... For some reason, I just willed through resetting it and just continuing from where I'm on. Where now I can't even finish a movie. So so that probably describes. So like you play Kingdom Come. Did you find Brian Blessed screaming at you, or he's in that game?
He
right?
is. No, yes. He's marvelous in that.
And what was your opinion of that game? Did you find it as like obviously liked it? Or?
It's flawed. It's a flawed game, like any game. Any game is going to come out and have flaws with it. I felt like that game, its combat system was just a little too overblown for what it needed to be. And, I enjoyed it. But when a game makes me feel like I need to start gaming its systems to really enjoy it, and I get that I could just get good, but when a game makes me feel like that it's better just to not get good and start gaming it, I feel like it's not doing something right.
Isn't the whole point of an RPG just gaming something?
You're not wrong, but it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example. You play a game like Fallout 4, and it pushes you towards playing a sniper character. It makes it much more viable to play a sniper over other player builds. That's not to say you can't play them and can't have a good time, but if you go in casually and just sort of follow what the game gives you and sort of lays out as a viable route, shooting from afar and just abusing the critical system will get you through the game a lot more easily than anything else. And as somebody who finds game design and game balance very fascinating, that's something that I feel like should be avoided. Whereas with Kingdom Come, for instance, there's an ability that if you get a downward strike on somebody's head, it has a set % chance of knocking them out immediately. And that can be gamed to finish most of the fights in the game. Yeah, so it's the kind of thing, it's like, well, I might as well just take this because it lets me beat anything. And there's nothing wrong with a game that, you know, gives you tools and lets you make choices for different powerful things, but when something feels much more powerful than everything else, it just feels kind of bad to me.
But like I watched a playthrough or two of Kingdom Come, and it's like it never really struck me as the most realistic medieval set. As much as they're like, you know, they came with the big sort of authenticity on their lapel and said, these are medieval characters, and this is a medieval time, and this is a real medieval city, and this is a real medieval city. It doesn't really feel real, right? Would you like a real medieval town? First of all, they're speaking English in Czechoslovakia, so that's the first thing.
The most historic of Czech languages.
Yes. But no, like I remember, like the guy is a pleb, right? He's like a serf, okay, or he's not a serf. He might be slightly above a serf.
Yeah,
he's a serf because he's lost his dad, so he's the lowest of the serfs.
Yeah.
And yet he's talking normally to people who would just like slice him in half for talking to them. So like I'm just thinking,
oh certainly,
that's an issue.
It's very much historic fantasy,
right? But like I mean, the game seems like it seems like a New Vegas. It seems like it's got all these little hidden things that would make it sort of live on. To be fair, to argue in the good of it.
Definitely. No, I don't mean to say it's a bad game. More that I personally didn't feel like... I mean, I'd say New Vegas is a flawed game. But at the same time, you know, it's just issues I see with it that, you know, hindsight's 20/20, but I'd do it differently.
And like, is there any other games you're playing that's something that's not flawed, something that's just so perfect but doesn't really fill you with the same kind of intrigue? Like, I don't know, there's obviously a lot of games like that. They're just like, hey, this game's great, now move on.
Man, is there a perfect game? That's a dangerous question.
You know, just like not...
The Fallout
like
4
just...
New Vegas remake, that's what's good.
Well, you know...
You know, I recently went back and replayed the original XCOM.
Really?
And it's clunky. It is dated.
Oh.
But I think despite being clunky and dated, it does approach that kind of perfection where it's got a very sort of just well-united set of systems that just make it very fun to play, even though I've played it probably 10, 15 times over the years.
What do you think of the new versions?
I like them. They're very, you know, they're basically a card game with an action game attached to it. And that's a great thing. Okay. It's good. It's a really good time. It's not what I go for an XCOM game, but for a real-time tactics game, or not real-time, a turn-based tactics game, it's great.
Well, when I play them, it's just like you enjoy the emergence of it. Like you get attached to your wee characters. I guess that's the whole argument of why the game was so successful, right? Because you're attached to your wee soldier, and this soldier went on this wee little journey and became a colonel, and he's been killed, and it's like all that effort's gone to waste. I never really played the old one, but I wasn't really attracted to the setting of the second one, which felt a bit Red Dawn-y. I don't know what it is with me in Red Dawn type settings. I don't particularly like them. I don't know. So, yeah. But in terms of the old games, like, I know what you mean. Like, they seem to last, if you know what I mean.
They have longevity to them.
I mean, there was this old game called Imperium Galactica. Have you heard of that? I don't know.
I've heard of it. Never played it.
It's like an RPG 4X space game.
Okay.
And it's never been done before. It's just like you play a character, right? But then you're also playing a 4X fantasy, but you're also playing a kind of story. and it was done by this Hungarian team, and it's like one of your usual politically incorrect cheap type from 1987, and it's kind of like XCOM. There's something quite amazing about it that's not really been replicated. So yeah.
Huh.
I mean, like, did you enjoy the Fallout 1 and 2? I never actually played through them, or...
I like them, and I have a very unpopular opinion, which is to say I think Fallout 1 is a far superior game.
Uh-huh. Why do you feel it's superior?
I guess it comes back to the whole... I've got a big thing when I play games. I like them to be unified, not just, like, have a bunch of really well-unified systems, but to have the narrative be reflected in the systems very well. And also have the setting reflect the narrative. And Fallout 1 does that very well. Every location's tied to the core narrative. Everything that happens relates to the narrative or the themes of the narrative. Fallout 2 is more of a collection of vignettes.
Yeah. Well, it's like that's the objective correlative. That's what I learned in which means everything has to be, evoke the main theme, and that nothing else can be more than that. Kind of like a fascist tyranny, where everything has to be evoke the theme of the thing. So I know what you mean by Fallout 1. I kind of have the same view, where basically every little beat in the game evokes what the game is trying to kind of say, or what your character you're playing is. Where Fallout 2 is just like, hey, here's a proper pop reference. So, that's generally what I've. Did you find that Fallout 4 kind of, or Fallout 3, the later Fallout games kind of fulfill that kind of parameters?
Fallout 3 did a fairly good job of it. Fallout 3 was pretty uniform in its tone and setting. It had some goofy offshoots, but, I still think it was a solid game for itself narratively. And for the time and being Bethesda's first shot at the setting, it was really well handled. Fallout 4 was kind of all over the place in some ways, but I think that just came down to, Fallout 4, if you look at it, there's a lot that clearly wasn't 100% finished with it on release. And they've talked after release about the issues they had with the narrative writing. And you can kind of see the cracks coming through where, there were themes that people wanted to explore but didn't get a chance to work on them, or they were forgotten about. And I think that does sort of hamper the final game.
Well, are you saying with Fallout 4, who's like they just didn't get the narrative correct, or like they just felt the themes were just all over the place and couldn't release a cohesive story? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, if you read some of the interviews they've had after release about Fallout 4, they discuss how they didn't really have a writing team, they just had level designers coming up with stories and sort of playing off things. And as a result, you had a very decentralized writing effort, and you can see narrative beats where it really does look, or at least feel like, somebody had an idea for something they wanted to work on later, but then the area was picked up by somebody else, or they got sidetracked and worked on something else, or forgot about it.
Well, obviously, they sort of nailed down their big turning point. Like obviously they came up with their big, kind of, it's your son's your dad. The son's the evil guy. And obviously they think, oh, that was a good. That's their main twist. But obviously the game kind of loses itself around that. So it's like it's either about the freedom of the synths, or it's about something. So like I can understand compared to like Fallout 3, it's like it doesn't really seem to sort of follow up in it, if you know what I mean. So like Fallout 3 has these raiders, right? Raiders are sort of ubiquitous to the Wasteland. And they're murderous, and they're cannibal. Like it's implied that they're cannibals, or they just like torturing people for the fun of it, just for the cruelty. And that they generally represent a setting where it's good versus evil, right? And evil has basically taken over, and there's only a small little beads of good. Where in Fallout 4, it doesn't really have the good versus evil thing. So the raiders kind of look kind of extraneous, and that as a result, the setting kind of makes them do those extraneous things. Like you see raiders like get sad over their dead friend or something like that, or make jokes, and it kind of like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's not a consistent tone. It feels out of place.
Yeah. Do you feel New Vegas sort of made that kind of correlative? Kind of the themes and the gameplay matched up, or?
In a lot of places, it did. It did fall flat in places, or didn't feel like it made sense with them never finishing a lot of the Legion content. Everything with the Legion feels very mustache twirling and comedic, especially if you kind of if you take yourself out of the game and look at it, you're like, these are the villains, these are the guys you came up with. And so it does sort of fall very flat when it comes to sort of trying to create a gray setting where one side is just very clearly, not intentionally, but still ends up coming across as very evil. Well,
I've thought about this, and I found it very difficult to come up with a good, like, obviously they do the thing in game where they just say, oh well, I get my, and they may slaughter people and put people on crosses, but I get my trade from here to here, and I made money, and like that's the sort of good side. And like I've always felt kind of unconvinced by that because it never really wins over the emotionals of the player. Like it just says it doesn't matter, freedom wins all, NCR, or House wants to save the future, or I want to take over the Wasteland myself. It doesn't. Legion can't really weigh against that unless the player is like a sociopath or just wants to see the Legion ending. So I mean, I personally found it quite difficult to find a reason why the Legion could be kind of redeemed, like have something that weighs them out. I suppose they tried to do that in the DLCs with Ulysses and things like that. But even Ulysses is like, I was just part of a bad crowd and now I moved on, So, I mean, how would you personally do something? How would you personally bring, a kind of good qualities to the Legion, like to make them obviously you don't want to change the story, but like how would you personally, make them empathizable?
Well, I mean, something that was, I could be misremembering this, and if so, sorry everybody who hears this, but, here we go. I recall reading, I believe it was from the Collector's Edition manual. It has a lot of different little bits of lore in it. And one of the things they discuss isn't just the security in Legion lands, but how there's actually a fair bit of rough equality and sort of functional society there, where people are allowed to go on living their lives as long as they pay their taxes, basically. But unlike the NCR, where it's like, well, we're going to tax you until you literally starve to death, with the Legion, it's like a flat rate tax. It's meant to make them seem far more, they're not entirely authoritarian. And I think maybe a step in that direction might do it, but honestly, without rewriting the Legion, I'm not sure you could actually make them any more sort of grey and compelling for your average person.
Like, did you have New Vegas on the PC, Metamoth, or?
I got it afterwards, yes.
Did you play any mods, and did you feel like they added to the game, or did you just stick with like graphical mods, or did you just like?
I'm trying to think. At the time, I think I had been tied up in a few other mod projects, so I wasn't spending a lot of time on RPGs because those are just big time sinks. But I poked at some weapon mods and good stuff there, but I don't think I had the time to really delve into a lot of quest content.
There's quite a bit of it actually.
Yeah, it's.
But, I mean, have you played like Fallout 4 mods, or do you feel like you're obligated to try sort of look through them and see what people you might bring on board, or you just feel like you have to be up to date, or you just don't play the game?
These days, I don't touch Fallout 4 unless I'm working on F4 and V, because I find myself getting frustrated because I'll see things that are like, well, that's something that should be fixed, and then I'll find myself down a rabbit hole of just fixing thing after thing after thing. So I do follow mods, and generally for Team F4 and V, we don't really like to approach a lot of people to invite them onto the team, because people's free time is valuable. And if they're already modding their own stuff, it's unlikely that they're going to want a bunch of people saying, hey, do you want to come work on our big mod project? We have so many great ideas for your work. A lot of people aren't going to appreciate that. But when the time comes that we do see somebody who's doing really cool, typically it's New Vegas related stuff, we might ask them, hey, would you mind giving us permission for what you're doing here? And if you'd like, you're more than welcome to work with us. But otherwise, we try not to pester people if we can get away with it.
You said you had a background in management. How do you find like managing a team through like the internet? Like, what are the challenges in that versus just like being in the office and being able to like deal with people directly?
Well, in some ways it's really similar, in others it's really different. It's similar in the sense that when you leave people a task, it's all about how you give it to them, and especially online, it just makes it all the more important. Where if you start laying down the law like some sort of dictator, you're going to see people jumping ship like there's no tomorrow. So with a team like this, you really have to lay out, this is what I think we should be working on, and I don't want to say it's a democratic process, because it's really not, but it tends to be an open discussion based on where the leadership thinks we need to go and how the team feels about those goals. And compared to a professional workspace, especially since we're all volunteers, it's very different, where it's typically just, hey, headquarters wants you to do this, so make it happen.
Yeah. Or you're not going to eat tonight because basically, like, you depend on your job for, like, your money. But Is that difficult in terms of just like holding people accountable if like somebody is just lagging behind or doing something you can't really like lay down the law because you don't want to lose them? Do you ever run into instances like that?
We actually structure to avoid that really becoming an issue. When we our project, I don't want to say has levels of like members because that really isn't a fair way to put it.
It sounds like a cult.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And for the low price, you too could be inducted.
Scientology has levels, don't they?
Yep.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
At the upper levels, we have our leadership. These are people who are generally there pretty much always or almost always working on the project to some degree. So those people will take on some of the bigger tasks, or they will sort of break it up into smaller tasks, and then hand it down to people who are sort of the core membership of the team. People who are almost always there, but, they have a life unlike the rest of us. Mm-hmm. So they, they pick up things. Basically, you have... 1 second, my screen just went to sleep, and I don't want that to kill anything. Okay, so, basically, we have the people who will sort of pick up the larger subtasks, and then we have new members or people who are sort of more casual about their involvement. And that's the bulk of our team. And those are people who, want to pick up an asset here that they want to do, or they want to do an interior or two, and that's totally cool. And by maintaining sort of an expectation of personal accountability for small tasks, instead of saying, well, I guess you're going to make us the entire kit for all of downtown New Vegas, we say, hey, if you could hammer out a new first aid box, or hey, you could hammer out, the interior of a house in X location, it tends to make it easier to manage people's involvement in the project and make them feel like they're making headway with us.
Nice. Any personal mod project you'd like to take on when this is over? You haven't thought about that yet?
Oh, man. Once I'm done with this, honestly, I think my big thing is we're going to be moving on. Provided we feel like it, and provided we make it, I would like to work on some of the DLC content.
So more New Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Fallout 4's engine, it's pretty stuff. Just imagine dead money.
Oh, yeah, that would be pretty sweet.
The Sierra Madre would be gorgeous in this engine. Not to mention, we can maybe move some of those radios.
What do you prefer, the DLC or the main game for New Vegas, at least?
Yeah, that's hard. I'd honestly say the DLC it has more impact as like a full arc. So maybe just for that reason, I do think it's better, and I think New Vegas is an infinitely better game with all of the DLC.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that was. I think we're finished. Okay.
Alrighty.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, Metamoth. Hopefully on Modcast episode 516, when it's finished, you can come back on and tell us about the finished project. And but otherwise, thanks for joining us and telling us a little bit more about the project.
Not a problem. Anytime. It was great talking to you guys.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.